All right, we're back. We are at COMP123 in the summer 2017 semester, and we are week 12, part 2 of our broadcast. We just talked about assignment number 5, which is due in a couple weeks, and now we're talking about Windows Forms, or an intro into Windows Forms. What are they? Well, I did put up a couple of PowerPoint presentations in the form of PDF files up on eCentennial, right? There's part 1 and part 2, intro to UI and UI controls. That's for you to read. Okay, so we're going to do this a little bit differently over the next couple of weeks, this week and next week. I'm going to be showing you the controls, but for details about how to use them, you've got some reading to do, and that's in here in the PowerPoints in the form of PDFs that I put up online. Okay, they give you details on how to do certain things, but I'm going to be showing you in detail right now by starting out with the new Visual Studio project. So please join me on this new Visual Studio project. I did one this earlier today. Of course, I named it wrong, but that's okay. Let's do this together. So how does this work? I'm going to click New Project, like normal. But instead of hitting a console application like before, we're going to hit Windows Forms application. That's the new one. It's a different kind of project. Okay. We're going to rename this thing to COMP123 Summer 2017, and it's Lesson 12B. You're the B team, and we're going to click on Create New Git Repository and press OK. Now, this is different. This is not like a console application. It has additional stuff in it. Let's take a look. First of all, my solution structure is weird. Okay, one thing is you get this little funky form right here, right? It's a visual representation of the code that's being used to project this. This is a projection, rendering, a drawing of what the form is going to look like, right? Notice that is a little square right now, right? On the right, we have our Solution Explorer, but for forms, we also have this Properties window. So please click on the Properties window, and let's pin it underneath here. And let me just unpin the windows, the Solution Explorer. So when I click on my form, a single click, I can see that there is a Properties window that comes up on the right-hand side. The Properties window is just that. It shows us the properties and methods that are built into the form. Okay. Notice that there are a few buttons on the top, and this is slightly different than what I showed earlier today. But let's take a look. One is, you can see that there's a button right here that my mouse is hovering over that says AZ. This is showing the form in alphabetical order. So all the form properties and methods are shown in alphabetical order. If I click on this one instead, it's going to categorize them. We don't want this. Please leave it in alphabetical order for us for today. That's number 1. 2, notice how there are little control handles here. Control handles, right? If I hover my mouse over here, you can see that I can move the form size around, but I cannot drag the form anywhere. I can't drag this form around. It's not like that. This is just the design view for what the form will look like in its final step. A preview, if you will. If I click play, so we're not running without debugging here. We're running with debugging. If I click play, right, the play button, start button, it's going to show me the form. And the default location is where the form is going to appear, up here. Take a look what it is. It's actually a Windows form. It's a piece of user interface, right? Take a look. I have the name of my form in the title bar. This is the title bar. I have a minimize button, a maximize button, and an X button, this close button, and they're all active. They have some kind of responsiveness. Depending on your Windows operating system, mine's Windows 10, you'll see that you have some hover effects when I hover my mouse over. Now, here's what we don't want. We do not want in our class for the remainder of the semester for me to use this maximize button. Take a look. If I click maximize, it fills up the screen, which doesn't make any sense, right? Why would I want a form that I'm going to make, like a login form, to maximize my screen? That doesn't make any sense, right? So unless you're going to align the controls or grow the controls, and that's not really the exercise here, right? So we're going to stop this from happening. The other thing is that this form has in the title bar, Form 1. That doesn't make any sense. That's not contextual. So we need to change this. In fact, if we look at our Solution Explorer, let's take a look. In our Solution Explorer, if I pin this up, let's now unpin the properties for a second. you can see that, by the way, I can move the tabs and the properties over here right now, but all I care about is my Solution Explorer. Notice that my form1.cs file is showing here, right? But it also has form1 designer and form1.resx. So there's 3 files is what it looks like. Okay? So what are these files? Well, form1, this is something called design time or design view, right? But I also have something else called code view. And I can get to that by right-clicking on my form and going to code view, view code. Take a look. View code on the menu. If I do this, it shows me the code behind file. That's what this is. This is the attached file, the code file from my form. Okay, that's what this is. It looks very similar to what we've seen before. It's a class. One thing, though, is it is a partial class, which is new, right? So what is a partial class? Think about my form broken up into multiple files, right? So maybe I have a class that's really big, and I want to be able to work on one part of it. So I can compartmentalize that part by splitting it up into 2 different files, right? There's another file that has the other part of this form, okay? So partial classes, when the program compiles, it looks at the partial classes, smashes them together, and creates one form, one class. Okay, that's what it does when in compile time. Okay? So where is the other side of this? Well, let's go back to my Solution Explorer for a second. So this is the one half. And then there's the other half in Form Designer. If I double click on Form Designer, now I have the other half. And if you notice, it is also a partial class, just like this one, right? But they're the same name. Form1 is the class name. Here's the other one. Here's Form1. Notice that this one inherits from the form class, but this one does not. It doesn't matter. They both inherit from the form class. Okay? Partial class is split between 2 different files. But this is a terrible name, Form1. Form1 makes no sense to us, right? We should never leave our form, any forms we create, as the default Form1 or Form2 or Form3. It should have the name of what the form does. So for today, we're going to make a demo form. So we're going to call it demo form. How do we rename it? If I go back to my Solution Explorer, here's what I want to do. I want to kind of click on my Form1. Now take a look over here, what's going to happen, right? I want to right click. I want to go to rename, right? And I want to rename my Form1 demo form. Notice that I'm using upper camel case. Both the first letter and the second word, they're both uppercase. Now look, I'm going to get this pop-up. Do not ignore this pop-up. If you click cancel here or no, it would be very bad. You want to click yes, that you want to propagate the changes in your application. If I click yes, then what's going to happen is it's going to rename my classes. Take a look. See how it renamed to demo form? And the same thing goes with this code behind file. It renamed it to demo form. And it also renames it in your program driver class. Notice that the program class, it's here as well. If you didn't do this properly and you rename it in some other way, like by just clicking in here twice, just naming it or press no somehow, you will have a problem. Okay? So that's number 1. So you must rename your form to something that makes sense. So now ours is called demo form. On that, we have several files that our project starts with, and you're going to have to document them. Well, here's our program class, our driver class program. This is a good place to start. So let's put our comments in here first. So in here, again, I'm going to put my minimal comments, right, where my name is in there, the date that I'm working on this particular file, which is August 1st, 2017. Right, a description. Excuse me. This is a demo application to showcase Windows forms and UI controls. That's what it is, right? And my version, here's my version, which is 0.1, where the project was created. Right? That's what happens. So this is pretty good. I want to also end it off. And that little comment is the comment header that gives me my information. If you were a student and you're going to do this, the other thing I ask for is your student ID. Right? So you put in your student ID in here, and you can put in, you know, whatever your student ID is, right, as an example, right? I don't need it. I'm not a student, but for you, it'd be probably good to put it in. Okay. So now I've got this part. I might as well copy this and put it inside my demo form.cs. So every time you have a form, you'll have this code behind file. And you want to put it in here too. This is okay because you know what? We haven't touched this file, this form yet, so let's leave it as is, like this. Okay? It's almost like you're just putting a stamp on both of these two things. You can't put it here. There's nothing to put there. And I don't want you to touch the form designer. Please do not put anything in the form designer. In fact, for the remainder of semester, I'm going to ask you to try not to work with the form designer at all, right? Because it's not necessary for right now. Later on, maybe if we have time next week, I will talk about it a little bit more. But I want you to think about the form designer as a do not touch file for now. Okay? Let's save all. And I'm going to put this up on GitHub by going to Team Explorer. I'm going to open this up. I'm going to go to Changes. I'm going to go to, notice my, here's my files. I'm going to say created project. Demo project, right? I'm going to commit all. I'm going to go to home, right? Sync. And because I haven't added before, you're going to see publish to GitHub. Now I have this option because I've downloaded and installed the extension for GitHub in tools and extensions, right? Extensions and updates. I did that, right? Remember we talked about this a couple of times. I'm going to click publish to GitHub. It's going to ask me where. I don't want to put it on my personal account. I'll put it on the Centennial account, and it should be 12B. Here it is, and publish. Great. So it's up there now. So now we've done all the requirements to start coding or start getting going with this thing. I'm going to close down my demo form designer, and notice that I have my form. But hey, look, this is bad. On the title bar, it says Form 1. It should say demo form, right? So to do that, I'm going to go to Solution Explorer. I'm going to pin this up. I'm going to grab my properties. I'm going to pin this down. And then I'm going to unpin my Solution Explorer. And now my properties takes up the whole screen here. I'm going to click. I'm just going to select by left-clicking on my form, which, remember, my properties is context sensitive, which means that the property window on the right is showing whatever I'm clicking on the left. So if I was clicking on something else, the property window would look different. If you can't access the property window, you can always find it by going to your quick launch bar on the top and typing in properties. Okay? And you can see that the properties window is the one I want. The shortcut is F4. Okay? If I want to view code, if I type in view code, right? You can see that view code. I can also do that. View code, which would view the code as well if you want to do it that way, right? But at the end of the day, what I want to try and see is this window here. So I've got a couple of tabs here for the different things I've got open. I've got my properties windows over here, and I've got my form here. Okay, to change the title bar, the form itself has something called a text property down here. So in the form, I'm going to rename this text, this thing, say demo space form. It actually takes in a string. That's what it does. Here it is right here, right? And notice on the top left corner now in my title bar, I see that's changed, demo form. See? All right, if I scroll up all the way, you can see that the name in open bracket, close bracket, and these parentheses, the name is the actual name of the object, the form object, demo form. This name mirrors what we put into our Solution Explorer when we renamed our form. Notice Solution Explorer says demo form. And so too, when I click on this form, at the top, if I go scroll up where it says name, right, in brackets, this is the name of the object. Speaking of names of objects and classes in general, let's take a look at our Solution Explorer for one more time. And let's add in there, by right-clicking on the actual project, let's add in a class diagram. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Here's a new item. I want to look at diagram, right? I can search for diagram up here. I can click on the class diagram and click add. And here's our class diagram. I want to drag and drop my demo form onto the class diagram. And you can see that when I expand the demo form to have my signature, the entire signature, it includes not just the stuff that's inside one form, but the entire class. Okay, so both partial files are combined here, so you can see all the methods and properties of both partial files. Okay. One thing to see, which is special, is what does this form inherit from? Notice that it inherits from class form. There it is. Let's take a look at our base class. So if I go show base class, right? It'll pull up the base class. There it is. And if I open it up, right, you can see that it is massive. Take a look. So when you make a form, a Windows form, right, application, you start off with a massive class. It's huge. It's full. And not only does it do this, but it also inherits from the container control class. Let's take a look at that. So let's just move this up here, crunch this down a little bit. Let's see what our base class is. Again, here's our container control class, right? Here's container control, which actually implements the container control interface. And without seeing implementation details, you can see that there's tons of stuff there, right? Let's also look at the base class for that, which you can see that it looks at the scrollable control. It inherits from scrollable control. And then further on, let's look at the base class. It inherits from control, which is very interesting because guess what? That means that at the end of the day, let me bring this closer in. Whoop. At the end of the day, I'm trying to fit it all on one screen. There we go. You can see that the demo form is a control, actually, which is messed up if you think about it. But it's a specialized form of control. Not only is it a control, but it's also a container. So that means that all controls, buttons, labels, text boxes, whatever you put on the form, they're all the same as the form itself, just less specialized. Right? These are controls. And notice that it inherits from something called component. Here's my component. There's a lot of classes here, right? And it inherits from, right, Marshall by reference object. Let's take a look. Which is an abstract class. So you can see that this object form, the demo form, there's a long line of inheritance that's happening here, right? And there's a bunch of interfaces that we're also implementing all the way down the line, okay? It's a really good understanding of what's happening here. So when I get my demo form, I actually have access to a ton of methods and properties that are built in, but they're very similar. That means once you understand how to use one control, because all forms and controls have an is-a relationship with control, they're all similar. They all have very similar properties. That means all of your controls are fat. They're almost the size of your form, almost. Take a look. Look, it's only a couple of steps towards control, right? Let's see how big and fat control is, right? Look, I'm just going to hide these ones for a second. Put them over here. Look at all this stuff. Every control has this stuff. Every single control. So if I put every control, if I put multiple controls on a form, it's really massive. So why does Microsoft do this? Because they don't know what you're going to put on. They're making a bunch of generic controls, right? And if I drag and drop stuff into my form, then I don't know what kind of functionality I'm going to need, so I give it all to you. That's what Microsoft does. It gives you all this. Look, every control has this stuff. Okay? And every control, if you look at one more step, Every control has this stuff, right? Lots of stuff here. And we can keep going, but you can see that it is massive. And that's why this form here is as big as it is. So I wanted to show you this so you understand the hierarchy, right? That this stuff wasn't built in a vacuum. You're not just making a form from scratch or whatever. It has a bunch of different things that are built into it. It is fat. Okay. So if we know that, then this is a container for other controls, right? If I want to drag and drop a control here, I can do that. But first, let's fix up some of the other things that I want you to fix. So from now on, I want you to think about what you can do to make your form look good. One, when I launch my form, this is what happens by default. Take a look. So this is fix number 1. Tom fix number 1, okay? Notice it starts over here on the left. Why? Because I haven't specified where it is. This is the default position. Let's specify where I want this form to start. And I can do that by going to pinning solution, going down to properties, pinning my properties, unpinning my solution, right? Clicking on the form. And where it says start position, I can change this to center screen. That's a property, right? I've just changed my property to say center screen. And when I click play, now the form starts in the center. Okay? Next, I want to disable this button here, this maximize button, because it doesn't make any sense for us. So how do I do that? So I'm going to go back up the form itself where it says maximize box and click false. By the way, I want you to think about this. If I have a property that's showing up here in my properties window, guess what? I can programmatically affect it as well. So if the form is called demo form and I want to access my opacity, then I would say demo form dot opacity equals and whatever I want the opacity to be in code. Okay? It's pretty straightforward. So you already know all the methods and properties pretty much by looking at the properties window right here. Right? It's pretty cool. Now, give or take, there's some tricky stuff you have to do in a couple places, but more or less, it's fairly intuitive. Okay, cool. So that's the first thing. Second, so I've done this one fix, which is center screen. I did this in my start position property, and then I went up to my maximize box and set it to false. Okay, and now if you check it out, if I press play, you can see that I cannot maximize anymore. It's grayed out, right? Next, I can also go into, now even if I do that, one more thing, I can still use my control handles to stretch this thing out all crazy, which doesn't make any sense, right? Because I don't want to have the user control my form this way, typically, right? It's not very often that I want to give them this kind of control. Why would I let them do that? Because then my layout would change, right? I want to control my layout, and typically I don't want them to resize my form, so I'm going to go back in there and change that. How do I change that option? I'm going to scroll up where it says form border style right here. Here's form border style. And I'm going to change this from sizable to fixed single for now. Fixed single. And if I do this, and if I press start, now you can see that I can't realign. It doesn't give me the control handles anymore to change the size of my form. I won't be able to do that. I can still minimize. I can still move my form around my screen, and I can minimize. Minimizing will put it on our toolbar here, right, on my taskbar. Here it is. And it'll put it back where I moved it to. And the X button actually closes my application. That's what it does. All right, so there's some really good functionality built into forms, right? It doesn't take, it's like really intuitive, okay? So those are the things that I want you to change at the minimum every time. For even though if it doesn't say it in your assignment number 5, please make sure that those controls are, set like that minimally. The other thing that happens is our font affects the way things look, and we'll talk about that in a second. So far we've talked about start position center screen, right? Maximize box false, that's second fix. And the third fix is form border style fix single. 3 fixes so far, okay? Next, my form can be sized, right, by eye, Oh, I like it this. Oh, I like this. Or more numerically, which is way more accurate. Example, I want you to make my form 320 by 480. How do I do that? If I scroll down, you can see that the size is set right here. I can change the size, the proportions, and the width and height to make them exactly what I want. 320, and then 480. And it'll give you a preview on the left. Here's the preview. By the way, 320 by 480 is standard cell phone size proportion, right? Cool. Great. Now when I run this thing, you can see that I'm going to have that type of proportion. Okay. Next, I want to add some stuff to this form, right? So again, I talked about programmatically aligning things, right? 320 by 480. I want to briefly talk about coordinate systems. I know we're not math class, but we are adding stuff into this container. And I want you to think about this form as a container with a set of coordinates, right? So my coordinate system inside my form, the 0, 0 point starts at the top left corner right here. Not here, not in the title bar, here where the white space is, right here in the corner where my mouse is, approximately. That's the 0, 0 point, okay? It draws in computers, for the most part, we draw across the x-axis and down the y-axis, which is counterintuitive because in math, we are counting y as up, right? But in computers, even if you're a gamer, y typically is down, okay? Which is weird, right? So the 0, 0 point is here, and if I want to put something in the middle of the screen, then it would be x, a number of x points here and a number of y points down, all right? X plus, y plus, y negative, x negative, okay? So here's my toolbox. Let's go to my toolbox on the left. Let's pin it. And now you have this scene, right? I have my toolbox on the left. I have my view, my designer in the middle, and I have my properties on the right, okay? On the left, I have a bunch of controls. I want to go to Common Controls, open it up, and I want to click on Button. And I'm going to drag and drop my button, right, to my form. Notice a couple things. My button is a control. It inherits from the control class, right? Which means it has all those properties, almost as many as my form does, right? And if you look at it, now that I've clicked on my form, my properties window shows my form. It shows it up here, my demo form. If I click on my button, my properties window is showing my button. Oh man, what an ugly name, button 1. I don't like it. It doesn't make any sense. It's not contextual. It needs to make sense with what I'm doing, right? I want to make hello world, right? Because this is our first user interface. So I want my button to be the hello button. Oh my God, I know it's crazy. I know it's so creative. I can't believe it. I'm so creative. Hello button, right? I need to rename the button, just like I did with the form, but I can only do it in here in my properties. I'm going to scroll all the way up to the top where you see your parentheses for your name and change the button to hello button, capital H, capital B. Now, this is my convention. You may choose a convention that's lowercase h and capital B. But please do not choose the convention BTN. I don't want that. You have lots of space. Make it button so it's clear. This because you're learning user interfaces. That's why I'm asking you to do this. Okay? So hello button. Notice that my hello button, that's the name of my button. And I want to change the couple things here. Notice that my button, I can move it around anywhere inside of my form. I can even move it so that it's half in and half out of my form like this. But I cannot move it over here, right? Because this is not inside of a container. I can move it here. As long as I'm partially in a container, my button or other control will sit here. Part of it will be drawn, part of it will not be drawn, but it will still be inside of this container. So even if you don't see it and it's part of my container, it's there. In fact, I want you to think of this. My button is a child of my form. And it's not child class. I want you to think about it as a child object, where I can have the parent object, which is my form, and the child object, which is my button or other controls, right? Now, my button has a couple problems. One is it's cut off. It's too small. I want to make it bigger, right? And by eye, I'm going to make it so it's a little bigger. It's by eye. And I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom where my text property. Notice that the button has a text property too, because it is a control, just like the form is a control. They share some of the same properties. One of them is the text property. And I'm going to change the text property to the hello, or, you know, say hello. We'll say the button says say hello. There we go. Yay. Now the button, my text inside the button can be aligned. Notice that the text alignment is right here underneath text. And you can align it top left. I can align it bottom right, let's say. I can also choose one of these other options, like for example, top middle and middle center, okay, which is the default. So I can realign the text inside my button the way I like. Cool. I'm going to bring my button down. And hey, how big is my button? Well, my size of the button is 111 by 45. That means it's 111 points. Notice I did not say pixels. 111 points by 45 points, right? Think about it as a grid, okay? 111 by 45. That's really weird. Let's make it so that it's 100. Let's make it 100. And let's make it by 40. Notice that I have that kind of control on controls too. I can align them not by eye, because that doesn't make any sense, guys and girls, right? I want to align it exactly how big I want it, okay? Now, notice when I move my mouse, if I hover on the left, on the control itself, I have these control handles. But if I go on the button itself, it turns into this other axis where I can move the button around anywhere I want, okay? Also, notice that if I go to the top, there's this little blue line that pops up. And if I go to the left or the right or the bottom, this little blue line pops up that gives me a little bit of alignment. But it doesn't align the thing inside the container. I got to do that manually. Why is that? Well, here's a problem. I have a button that's 100 wide, and my height is 40. My container is 320 by 480, right? If I want my button to be in the exact center somewhere, not by eye, but the exact center, how do I do that? Well, first you need to know how does it align to 0, 0. If I want to put my button at the 0, 0 mark, it's going to appear somewhere up here, because this is the 0, 0 mark in its local coordinate space for the form. The form itself has coordinates starting at 0, 0, all the way across, right, to 320, 0, all the way down to 320, 480. That's the biggest point. 320, 480, right? Okay. So if I want this to start at the top left corner, 0, 0, I can do that. I can go to the location property right here of the button. And in the location property, I can start it off at 0, 0. Let's try this out. 0, 0. Notice that it's exactly in the corner, right? That's the 0, 0 mark for my form. Okay, now take a look at something else. The top left corner of the button is its own 0, 0, right? So in the local coordinate space of the button has its own coordinates, 0, 0, which is on the top left corner, right? That means that if I align the button to the middle, and if my screen is if my window is 320, and if I put it in the middle, that would be 160 in the middle of the screen, right? And then if it's 480, the middle will be 240. So 160 by 240, right in the middle of my window app, right? Let's try this out. See what happens. It's not centered, right? So here's 160. I'm actually aligning the window. I'm aligning the location of my form. I'm gonna go fix that in a second. 160 by 240, right? That doesn't look centered to me. We fix the form now, right? We don't. The location should not be this. The location should be center screen, right? Should be center screen. So if I actually run this thing, it should still start at center screen, but that's where it is, right? All right, so notice, say hello doesn't look centered at all, right? But that's because the top left corner of say hello, where my mouse is right now, that is center screen. Well, hold on, that doesn't look like it's center screen anyway. Well, yeah, because you're looking at also this part. This part here takes up some real estate up here on the top. Plus the border around this part here, the border to the left, the border to the bottom, that's all real estate. So you have to adjust for that a little bit. First, let's align the button. The button is 100 wide, and if the top left corner is where it is, I have to move it back negative 50x, right? So that means if I look at the button, instead of it starting at 160, it should be what? 110. Right? That looks a little better. And now, 240, well, I know the button height is 40 points, so I want to subtract half the height, which is 20. So 220 is where they should be. And that approximately is where the middle of the screen is, right? And again, because of this top part, bottom border, and so on, right? If I launch this thing, you can see that the middle button is approximately in the middle, not including this part. If I actually put my finger over it, right, you can see that it's mostly in the middle, but there's a bit of an offset. Okay, I'm just being honest. That's how it works. So we don't want to align by eye, but I want you to understand coordinate system. So if you want to, how come it's going over here? But this is the reason. All right. Next, let's pull this button down. So right now this button is at 110 to 220. Let's make sure that it's 110. We're just going to move it down, and then we'll reset the middle to 110. We can use the I for the Y coordinate. But for the middle, we'll make sure this is 110. Cool. All right, well, this is pretty boring, right? The button doesn't do anything. If I actually run the code right now, the program, if I click on this button, it doesn't do a darn thing. Why? I need to code the button. The button right now is just an empty control, right? In order for me to make the button do something, I have to create a trigger, right? I didn't talk about this too much in class, and I'm going to talk about it again on Thursday. But I want you to think about this. There is something called an event. And you're going to learn about events in Programming 3, okay? More. I'm going to really talk about them at a high level here. But I want you to think of it like this. An event will be raised. That's what we say. An event will be raised if I click on this button. Because this button is a control, it is listening for me to click onto it. Listening. That's kind of a weird thing, right? How can the button listen? It has no ears, right? But that's what we call it. We call it listening. It's actually, there's an event listener that's active for this button, right? It's actually active for the form too. My form is listening for my mouse to click onto it and move it around, right? If I want to move my form around, as an example, my form is listening for me to do this, right? Whatever I'm doing with my form. That's what it's doing. My button is listening for me to click onto it. So I have a listener. After I click onto it, I have to handle what happens to my click event. I'm clicking onto it. I've got to be able to handle that kind of action, right? And we handle it with an event handler. There's an event listener, and there's an event handler. There's two parts to it. It's almost like I'm throwing something. Here's the event, and then I'm catching it, right? The event is triggered when I click onto it, and it throws an event. It raises the event. I'm listening for it all the time. And then I have to handle that event somehow. Okay, cool. I don't have a handler. Did I write a handler? No. Until I write a handler somehow, I can't do anything with this button. Luckily, Microsoft makes it very easy. All we need to do is double click. So if I click on the button, if I double click onto it, the button, it actually creates part of the code itself right here. And this is why I told you this is the easiest part of the course. It's almost like I'm lightly scripting. I'm not really coding. I'm using C#, but I need to understand the Windows Forms API for me to do this stuff. Once I understand the API, I don't even have to know C# very much. Okay? Let's take a look. So here, I'm going to add some comments. It's a method. A method's a method, right? I'm going to // I'm going to say this is the hello button event handler for the click event. Okay, I'm clicking onto it. When I click onto it, I want some method to handle my click. This, when my click is going to be the trigger, right? This is going to be the response. I have an action. I need a response. This is the response right here to the action, right? So when I click on the button, I need a method to handle what's going to happen, the event handler, right? Or the responder, if you will. Okay, this is the responder. So in my hello button click event, there's a couple of parameters. One is the sender object, and the other one is something called E, which I really hate that Microsoft did this, because I don't like E. I don't like little methods like that, method or parameter names. But actually, what they stand for, E stands for event, right? Event arguments is the class. E stands for all the event arguments, or the actual event itself. In this case, the click event. That's what it stands for, right? Sender is actually referring to the object that was clicked. Which object was clicked? My hello button. So sender refers to the hello button, and E is the event that I'm using with my hello button, which is, in this case, the click event. All right? Now you might say, why do I need to know this? It's too much detail. I can't remember now. It's in the middle of the afternoon. I need a coffee. I get you. I'm with you. But these things will become more apparent with you as you use them. All right? Okay, so now that we know this, I want to affect the button itself. You can do something in here, right? But I have nothing to do yet. Let's go back to my form one more second. Here's my form. Now, there are 3 main controls that we put in all forms. Actually, there's 4, okay? We've already done one of them, which is the button. You put labels on forms too, right? Some kind of label that tells you what to do. Log in, right? That's a label, right? Maybe some kind of message. Then there's a text box, some kind of input control. We can enter stuff in, right? And then maybe a picture, some kind of image. Guys and girls, that's it. Now you know forms. I mean, really, those basic controls plus a bunch of other ones, right? Like radio buttons, some kind of pull-down menu, a bunch of other things, any common controls that you've ever seen in any Windows application or a Mac application or on the web, right? It doesn't matter. Those common controls are the same ones that we're going to use here. So I want to use a label. I'm going to go to Toolbox. I'm going to kind of stick this on again, pin it. I'm going to go to Label here and drag and drop. Notice that when I put the label in, there's this magic kind of alignment line that comes on, right? It's kind of like a grid or a guide. That's what it is. And if I click onto it, it actually adds the control to the form again. Now I have a second child. I have the first child, which is a button, and the second child, which is a label. And these 2 control objects are inside or contained within the form container, which is also a control. Now, if I look at this, here's my label. This doesn't make any sense. This label isn't right. I want to go and change it a little bit again. I'm going to go into my properties, right? And I want to rename this label, right? And again, I'm going to go all the way to the top where it says the name of the label. I'm going to rename this thing to hello label, right? Oh my God, I know this is really super creative, right? But it makes sense, more sense, right? Hello label, okay, cool. And I'm going to scroll all the way down because my label is a control. I should have a text option. Here it is. Here's my text box, my text property. I'm going to change this to, right, something like click the button below, right? Some kind of message. Uh-oh. Look, my label's kind of misaligned, right? And I want to put it somehow in the middle, right? Now, I know that the size of the label is 168 by 20, right? By the way, notice I cannot use, there's no little control handles here on the label. I can't manually change the size. It's based on the font size, and it's pretty darn small, right? Let's make this font size bigger of the label. That's another property. Notice I can click here, and if I click onto the font itself, there's these little ellipses that come up. If I click on that, it brings up a dialogue box. Here's a dialog box that comes up, and you can notice that I can choose a different font. Let's make it 16. Okay, this is really massive. Part of it is going to be outside of my view. And if I actually go here and run it, you can see that part of it is going to display outside. That's bad. So let's make it a little smaller, right? So instead of 16, let's go down to about 12, right? And now we can align it kind of in the middle by eye, but I can't really get it. And now let's take a look at the size. My size of my label is 253 wide by 29 tall, right? Okay, what's half of 253? Well, 252 divided by 2 is 125, and another one, 126 and a half, right? 126 and a half. I've got to move over 126 and a half from the middle, right? Which is 160 minus 126, which is, really quick calculations in my head, that's probably around, what, 34? 34? That's got to be the location of the left side, right? So let's take a look how close I was. Here's my location. I'm 33. Close. So my eye was pretty good. Move this to 34, right? That's exactly centered now, right? See how I did that? I took the width of my label or control, cut it in half, right? And I'm going to subtract that number from the location if I want to make it in the middle. So if my location, middle location, because my form is 320 wide, the middle is 160, and then I'm going to go from 160, I'm going to subtract half of the size of my control to center it, okay? Now, there's other ways to do this too, but I'm showing you the manual way first because once you know this manual way, then the other stuff is easier, right? All right, cool. So I've got my control here. Let's check this out. So if I run this now, I can see my control is centered. If I click say hello, oh man, nothing happens. I got to code the control now. Let's do this. So how do I do that? Double click on this again. It's not going to make a new one. It's going to take me back to where I was. And now this is magic, guys. This is, you know, mind blown. Here we go. Watch this now. Hello label, right? Dot text. When I click on my control, my hello label dot text is going to be equal to, oh, you're going to love this. Hello world, right? Oh yeah, that's crazy. This is like mind blown stuff, right? How does this work? Well, let me check this out. Watch, if I press play, now there's issues. Guys, there's issues. We'll talk about them. Here's one of the issues. Watch. Say hello. Did you notice an issue? It's not centered anymore. So over here, look, the size of my label, it's way over here now, right? It's not in the middle anymore. That's a problem, right? And if I click say hello again, it doesn't do anything. It only does it once, right? Because that's what I've told it to do, right? Take a look. It says when the button is clicked, this event handler is going to trigger when the button is clicked for the first time, right? Then it's going to change the label, the text property of the label to hello world. But if I click it again, it's going to do it again. But it's already changed. So nothing's going to appear to happen. Okay? Questions around event listeners and event handlers. We haven't really seen the event listener, by the way. It's in the background. But the event handler is what we're writing right now. This procedure, if you call it, we used to call this the event method or the event procedure. That's what it is, right? This event method is really capturing the click event for the button, right? So when we click on the button, we trigger the event, we raise the event, and we capture what's going to happen here. Okay, this is neat. But here's some problems. Here's a common error. I want to show you the common pitfalls when you use forms. You might click away and you might try and drag and drop stuff all over your form, and I invite you to try these things. Fantastic. But what if I don't double click, sorry, let me just close stuff for a second. I don't double click on my design properly. Instead of double clicking on my hello button, oh man, I double click on my label instead. Can I do that? Well, yeah, I just can label. I mean, that means if I click on the label, it's going to do something? That's weird, right? Normally, that doesn't make sense from a user interface perspective. Clicking on the label shouldn't do anything, right? But we want our label, when we click on the label, to do something too. Oh man, it's an error. And the first instinct that you're going to have is, what if I just delete this, right? I don't need this. This method is useless, right? Guys and girls, this is crazy thinking, right? Because think about what's really happening, right? When I drag and drop a control onto my form, what's really happening? The control, remember I talked about this other stuff here, the Solution Explorer? I have this designer right here. The designer is keeping track of where everything is. It's the details. If I scroll down, again, I don't want you to touch this, but I want you to understand how it works. If I scroll down, this section here is hidden, right? Well, take a look. Here's my hello button, right? Here's my event right here, right? Here's my other form stuff. Here's my hello label. Here's my sizing. Here's my event, right? Great. Double clicking creates some code. But what if I go in here and I just delete it like this? Now you're going to scream. All right. If I save this and I go over to my designer, I'm like, ah, my form broke. Oh my God, Tom, help me. It's the last day before my assignment is due, and I don't know what happened. My form broke. It doesn't work anymore. Can you help me? No. Right? Why? Because what you've actually done is you've caused an error, right? Take a look at your Solution Explorer if you did that. There's an error in your code, and the error is inside of your designer. Actually, it tells you right here. It says the designer cannot process unknown name hello label click. It's looking for it because even though you double click and it creates it, it doesn't mean that you can just delete it, right? If I go to my form designer, you can see that there's an error right here because it's looking for something called hello label click, which doesn't exist because we erased it. And that's why it cannot draw the visual, can't visually represent your form anymore. To fix it, there's two fixes. One, if you can, undo, right? But if you've done a bunch of other stuff, let's say you worked and you didn't realize your form was broken, you kept on working and adding stuff in, and then you can't undo anymore. It's too late, right? You can go to your form designer and just remove this line, this offending line right here, right? Which will remove the reference to the event handler. Notice it says event handler here, right? It tells you what this thing is. It's an event handler. We can remove the reference. This is a reference to the event handler. That's what it does. It says, hey, guess what? My hello label click, this thing here, this is an event, right? We want to assign an event handler to this event. An event is an action. I can have many, many actions for my objects, my controls. Many more, many actions. Like, for example, when I hover my mouse over a control, that's an action, right? I'm hovering. If I drag and drop, that's an action, right? If I click onto it, that's an action. If I click off of it, that's an action. If I press on my keyboard, that's an action. All these actions cause events to be raised, and you need to be able to capture those events with event handlers, right? And here's where we list it. So if I delete this inside my designer, right? And if I press save, and if I go back to my design view, now I'm back. Here's the clean way to delete stuff like that when it happens. Let's suppose instead of clicking my label by accident, I double click on my form, which is a very common thing that happens. The form itself can also raise events. Why? Because I can move my form around, because my form is drawn to the screen. When my form is drawn to the screen, it raises an event. When I minimize it, it raises an event. When I close it, it raises an event. Anything I do with my user interface raises an event, and it's just up to me to capture that event with an event handler. Okay, that's what it does. So this demo form load is the default event type for my form. When my form loads, I want something to happen. That's what this means, right? But I don't want this. Hell, I can't delete this like this, okay? I can't just go here and delete it. Because again, if I deleted it, just to show you, and I go back here, death, right? No, right? You can undo. The right thing to do, notice that's back, right? The right thing to do is go to your properties. So I'm going to pin my properties up for a second. I'm going to go to my design view. Here's my event. And notice that there's a bunch of buttons up here. One is how you organize your properties. There's also this lightning bolt, right? If I click on my lightning bolt, it shows all the different types of events that are available for that type of control. For example, my form is a control. Therefore, I'm trying to raise the load event, which is the default event for my form. And I have this demo form load method that I have listed here. Just delete it here. If I just delete it here completely like this, erase it, and click away, and if I go back to my form, you can see now that if I delete this, a couple stages here, she be gone, right? And if I go back to my designer, I'm okay. Why? Because I removed it. And what's doing here, what's happening in here? This is a visual representation of what's being captured in your form designer. That's all it is. So anything you do in on your properties is happening programmatically in your form designer. That's what's happening, okay? So let's recap. I know I talked to you guys a lot about a lot of stuff, and I've been going for a long time now. But the reason why I'm doing this is to help you understand how forms work. Again, on the front side, you have 3 different states. Your design state, which let's call it design view. Your code state, which is your code behind file, right? Or code view, right? Then you have your run state. When I click on run, this is your run view, runtime, right? And meanwhile, before runtime, there's compile time, where it compiles everything and puts it together, right? Forms. Okay. Does anyone have any questions so far? I know this is like, you might say, oh, Tom, you know, it's pretty easy stuff. Hell yeah, it's supposed to be easy. I told you. Think about this. You almost have everything you need to do your assignment already, right? Here's something you need. You need some way of input. And I'm going to tell you this, and listen to me once and for all, right? Any input you get from any kind of form with Windows, Android, iOS, web, anything you get input from, they're all strings. String input. Doesn't matter if it's a number. It's a string, right? Which means we get a number, we need to convert it from a string to a number, okay? We're not really getting a number. It looks to the user like it's a number, but it's not a number. It's a string, which means I need a text box. If I go to my toolbox, right? And if I take my text box, here's my text box right here, and I drag it into my form, now I have a text box that's pretty small. I can change the size of my text box. I'm just going to go into my form again. I'm going to go bring up my Solution Explorer, and I'm going to click on my properties to bring this up. And again, I do this because I have a big screen right now, and I want to make sure you can see everything. That's why I'm doing it this way. But if you click on the text box, you can see that there's a bunch of properties. Now, the reason why it's showing this is because my lightning bolt is still selected. This is all my events. I don't care about the events right now. All I care about is the properties. I'm going to click on properties again. So properties, right? Properties, events. Properties, events. Okay, I want properties. So here's my properties. I want to make this text box bigger. I can resize it manually like this. Now here's the control. The text boxes have a lot more control than labels, right? But text boxes allow input, right? Also, I want to make my text box a little bigger, so I need to change the font size. If I go to the font size, here's my font. And if I click onto it, I want to make it 12 again. So you can see that the text box is the right size now. There it is. Okay. Notice that I can move my text box, and it gives me 2 aligning guides, right? So it aligns both to the right side and the left side of my label. Okay. Okay, now this is where I'm going to get my input. And you know what? I probably need to rename this thing because it's just going to say text box 1. It's pretty ugly, right? It's going to be my name text box. Let's put that in there. So I'm going to call it name text box. Notice what I'm doing here with my naming conventions, right? What did I call my label? Hello label. What did I call my button? Hello button. What did I call my text box? Name text box. The name that I'm using includes the control type at the end, right? So it's whatever the name is, whatever kind of function it's going to do, and then the last part is the type of control. Text box. I'm putting my name inside of a text box. Name text box. I'm displaying my hello message in a label. Hello label. Get it? Okay. All right, so I need another label. Let's put another label inside this thing. We're making a more complex, kind of a little bit more of a complex user interface. And here's my label. And let's keep it small this time. I did this slightly different. I'm going to call this the name label. Notice I'm just changing the name. And in the text property, I'm going to change the text property from label 1. So it says enter name, right? And I'm going to make it so that they hug each other like this. A little closer. There we go. Enter name. And now when I run it, just to test it, here's my user interface, right? And I can see enter name, and I can put in a name like Tom, right? And if I click say hello, what I really want to say is hello, Tom, right? Uh-oh. That's a branching statement. That's a conditional statement, right? But I got to be able to test for it, right? Well, I have, remember, now that I've named them properly, I have access to all the controls inside of my code behind file. So if I drag and drop a control on my form, I have access to it on the code behind file automatically, right? But I need to be able to find it. That's why I need to be intelligent in how I name it. If I leave it as hello or label 1, and if I have 10 labels, how do I know which one I mean, right? That's why I want to make sure that each of the controls is properly named so I know how to access them, right? So I want to change the value of my name text box, right? When I get a different value in my name text box, I want my hello label to change, right? When I click on my say hello button. See how that changed? So here's the way we would write this. As a user, right? When I click on my say hello button and there is some kind of name that's been entered into the enter name, the name text box, I want my message to display hello and my name. See the requirement? That's a different requirement than clicking the button and making hello world, right? But if there's nothing in the text box, I want to say hello world. That's the else condition. Okay, let's do this. So I'm going to double click on my say hello button and I'm going to open it up. And now, okay, cool. I have this one method that I've written, hello button, but I want to do an if condition. Let's see how we can do this, right? I'm going to say, well, if, now what am I looking at? I'm looking at the name text box. So name text box. Here it is. Look, name text box. Name text box.text. Can I do this? Can I do like is equal to this? I could because it is a string, but you're going to have a problem. Remember we talked about not understanding C#? It's not important here, right? Because really, what is happening, right? We don't even know. So let me show you this. If I say if my name text box is equal to empty, or I can also say string.empty, right? Well, then maybe make my hello label.text. If it's not empty, let's for a test, let's just say not empty. When I click on my button, right? If my name text box.text is not empty, is got this empty string, right? Then I'm going to put in not empty. Okay, but that's messed up, right? That's messed up. Okay, if that happens that way, if it's equal to this. Let's check on see if this works. So I'm gonna run it, and if I click onto it, not empty. It's equal. Okay, so it's empty. But hold on a second. I don't want it is equal. I want it to be not equal. So if it's not equal to this, then it's going to say hello world. That's what I want. All right, cool. Let's try this out. Different than I did before. So then hello world, because now it's not equal to this, right? Well, hold on a second. Hold on a second. If it's not equal to the empty string, but of course it's equal to the empty string. We didn't put anything in there, yeah? Yeah, but guys and girls, you don't know what's happening in the background. And this is why I'm showing you this, because what you think is supposed to happen, you think this is empty, but actually it's not. It has a value in there. It has the empty string, which is a value. So you can't test for it this way. You have to test for it like this. You have to say, hey, is the length of my string greater than 0? Then you know there's something in there. That's a better test. So let me try that out. So I'm going to go back in here and say if my length of my text, and if I hover over it, the text property is actually a string. It shows you right there, right? So I can apply all we know about strings, which is length. if my name text box dot length, right, is greater than 0, so it's not 0, then we know that it's not empty, right? And if it's not empty, I want to take whatever it says here and add it to hello. So instead of hello world, it's going to say hello plus the name. So which means this is going to be hello plus the name text box. And you guys can guess what this is, dot text, right? I'm just fooling around with properties here. All I'm doing is using a class, right? Each of the objects that I put inside my on my form, I can access by accessing the properties, right? I press save and I press run, and now if I click say hello, it should say hello world because the size of my string is 0. But if I put my name in there and I click say hello again, now it's gonna be hello Tom. If I erase it, right, and click say hello, it's going to say hello world again, right? Events, right? I'm really only having one event. There's only one event happening right now, right? I'm not listening right now. I'm not handling how I'm entering the data into my text box. I'm not handling it, although it's raising actions. Every time I press a button on my keyboard, it's raising an event. I'm just not listening for it. I don't care. Right? If I move my form around, right? So I take my form, move it around, that's raising an event. But I don't care, right? I only write the methods that I care about. Because if I was going to start writing methods about everything that I can do in my form, we can be writing stuff until tomorrow, right? There's lots of stuff that can happen on the windowing system, okay? So a very simple example. But one of the things I also want to leave you with is this, right, before we go for the day, right? Yeah, thanks, Tom. You showed us how to do stuff. And yes, you told us that this is always a string, no matter what I enter in here. So for example, if I enter the value 1, right? Excuse me. If I enter the value 1, even if I enter the value 1.0, right, it looks like it's a number, but it's not. Which means I can do 1.0.0. If I want to calculate 1.0.0, will that make sense? The answer is no. Right? Because if a user enters 1.0.0 in a calculation, right? Or how about this? 1a plus 1b. You don't know what 1a is. 1a doesn't mean anything. It's not a number. 1a is a string. And if I try to add two strings together, it's going to crap out. My application will crash. So user input, controlling user input is very, very important with any kind of form you make from now until the rest of your life, right? Because the user is the biggest problem when we make programs. Even though we make programs for the user, they can break our code, right? And they'll find creative ways to do this, way more creative than me, right? My job as your professor is to try and break your forms, right? So that if I can break it, I'm your first line of defense, right? If I can break it, then somebody else can break it too. And I want you guys to think about how to validate user input. We're going to handle that next day, right? Because I can enter whatever I want here. And if I want to convert it, right, it won't convert properly if it's not a number. That's number 1. 2, this is nice, but we did everything by eye, right? If I want a more definitive way of adding things in, I'm just going to move this up a little bit. I can add in a layout. And I talked about layouts earlier very briefly to the other section, right? In my toolbox, there are, if I click for layout, if I look at layout, there's 2 different layouts. There's the flow layout and the table layout, right? The table layout reminds me of the old way of doing web forms back in the day, right? In the 1990s when we used tables instead of CSS, okay? You guys don't remember it because most of you were born way, way after 1990, right? But like I said, in the 90s, a lot of times we didn't have CSS, good, cascading style sheets for style for our web. We didn't do that. And we use tables to do that. So too can you do it here. If I drag and drop a table layout into my my form, we get a grid. And the grid actually allows us to format where my buttons and other objects are going to be, right? For example, let's say I want to put a grid. This is a table. And I want to put some buttons in here, right? Now, right now, I have these things hanging out here. If I want to have more control, I can add in, or I can modify this, these controls to have more kind of a setup way of adding all my buttons and stuff in here. For example, if I want to put my button in here, it'll actually be left centered inside of my grid. And if I take this and put this inside there too, it'll actually try and put that whole thing in the grid. So why grids? Because it's like if I grid up my form, I have more control over where everything goes, as opposed to by eye, right? So think about that. We're going to hit that later on again, and I can always undo, by the way, right? So I can put them back. But the grid, the way you can control your form, if I go to this little arrow, if I click onto it, you can see that I can edit rows and columns. So I can say that as an example, well, I want there to be only one column, so I can delete one. So go click on one and delete it, right? And I can make this 100%, let's say, or I can make it absolute number of pixels if I really want to go there, or I can auto size it. Let's make it 100% for now. I did it differently earlier. By the way, there's some information on aligning a control within a cell, which is right in here. We're going to cover that next day, right? Press OK. Okay, here's so I got one column. And now if I want to do one row, okay, let's do that. So let's just remove last row. Now I've got one row and one column. And if I go back here, right, if I go back here to my edit rows and columns, I can see that there's only one row. And my row is 50%. Let's make that 100%, right? And press OK. So my row is 100% wide, taking all the space, right? And my column is 100%, right? Row and column, the same. And now if I take a button like this and put it inside, notice that it goes to the top left corner, right? And if I look at the properties, let's go back to properties for a second. Is there a property that I can use, right, to align my button exactly in the center of this grid, right? By the way, if you look at the help function, right, of this, there is typically something called an anchor. Here's my anchor, top and left. I was going to show you this next day, but I might as well show it to you now. The other class is getting mad at me. But I can, instead of top left, I can go directly in the middle, right? So you notice I have anchor points everywhere. And if I click away, it's right in the middle, but it makes my button massive, right? See how my button's massive? So I can take these away. So I want to take these away. I can undo the ones I don't want, make this like this, go back. See how that works? That aligns nicely like that. It's exactly centered. I don't have to calculate anything. I don't have to sit there and go, this minus this. Again. No. Make sense? So there's ways of aligning your rows and columns. And if I really want to go crazy, I could hug this up like this. And I can have as many of these, right? As many of these grids as I want inside of my layout to align things exactly where I want them. Exactly proportional. Exactly where I want this thing, right? That's why the table layout is so popular and easy. Okay? Questions around Windows forms. Okay, let's recap. First of all, let me put this up on GitHub. So I'm going to go to Team Explorer. I'm going to go to Changes. I'm going to say Updated Projects. We did a lot of stuff here. It wasn't about GitHub today. It was really around trying to do all this work, right? I'm going to go to Home. I'm going to go to Sync and Push. And now you should have it up on GitHub so you can see what I have. You can always download my project and check it out and see if you did anything differently. Notice here, let's recap before we go for the day. We talked about the Solution Explorer, and the first thing we talked about was renaming my form from Form 1 to Demo Form because it doesn't make any sense, right? We talked about that. We talked about comment styles and how I want you to put your comments at least in the form that you've created, Demo Form, plus in your program file, at least those two places. If I had more than one form 1, form 2, form 3, I would put comments in all those ones. And of course, they wouldn't be called form 1, form 2, form 3. They'd be called something else, right? Okay, we talked about that. We talked about how the properties window is context sensitive and that there are 3 states when we create our form, right? One is design state or design time, if you will. We have our code behind file because it's behind the visual, right? The visual is what we see, but behind that we actually have some code to do something. The functionality behind all the controls is in our code behind file, in our code view, right? That's what it is. And that code view works for all the controls inside that one form. If I have multiple forms, right, the code view is only for the form that it belongs to. So if I have more than one form, well, guess what? That code view won't affect the other form. It only affects this form, okay? Which is important, which means I can have the exact same controls on every form with the exact same names, but they're different objects because they belong into a different container, okay? So that's the code behind file. We also have our designer, our form designer, which I want you to think about as a manifest, a map of where everything is programmatically on our form, right? So we drag and drop, yeah, but it keeps track of everything here from a code perspective. We don't touch it because we don't care about it. From a rapid application development perspective, you want to drag and drop, click, code really quickly, and create our forms in 10 minutes. You can create an application. The assignment 5 that I gave you, if you work hard, in an hour, it's done. Why? Drag and drop, double click, put your code in there, and it's over, right? And yeah, there's some stuff you need to still learn about it, but for the most part, you have 80% of what you need to get going right now, right? I recommend you get going. On Thursday, I will do a lab, right? The lab will be to create your user interface for your assignment 5, okay? If you hand it in, I'll give you 0.5%, right? Just the user interface, because remember I talked about this. It's smart to break up your tasks like this. First do the user interface, design it and plan your user interface. Then do your functionality. Don't do both at the same time, because what if I change my user interface? Then I gotta change my functionality, and it's rework. So do your user interface first, and then do all your functionality after, right? And then from a test perspective, right? User interface is going to be worth some marks, right? So get that done. Even if you have no functionality, you still get some marks for that, right? For just putting things on the user interface. That's important. Okay, so we talked about that. We also talked about how to align your form and some fixes, some quick fixes that I talked about. So Tom's quick fixes, which I'm going to go over again, which are starting position is center screen. I talked about that. I talked about taking away the maximize box, setting it to false, because we don't care about maximizing our form because it doesn't make any sense. If I put it back to true, for example, really quickly, let's try this out. If I put it back to true and try with my form to do this, well, my form would be whacked out, right? It would look like this. Look, how does that make sense, right? It doesn't is the answer. And that's why we take it away, right? We take it away unless you really need to, or you're going to create a responsive application, which we are not in this course. That's out of scope, okay? Our applications are going to be absolutely positioned because we're just learning user interfaces, right? So that's why we're doing it this way. In the future, you should learn responsive interfaces, right? And there's another more advanced version of Windows Forms called WPF, Windows Presentation Foundation, which we will be not learning in this course because you'll be using Windows Forms in Programming 3. I'm not going to teach you Windows Presentation Foundation, which is the more modern way to do stuff, because you use XML and something like a CSS to design the layout for your form, right? Which is way better. But I'm not going to show you that here. Here, I want you to understand laying out stuff on a form, okay? Basics. Okay, so we talked about that. We also talked about how most of the tools you're going to use, 99% for Programming 2 and Programming 3 are going to be here inside of your toolbox. And there's many, many of them. We've talked about 3 basic tools today, which are your button, your label, and your text box. Okay, those are the 3 things we reviewed today.
Yeah,
What was that? Table 2. Yeah, but that's not really a basic. That was just the last thing I wanted to show you, right? But I want you to think about this, that if you look at your PowerPoint presentation, right, there's other controls that I also talk about there, right? Like your radio button, like some kind of list control, and a bunch of other ones. And you may need some of those when it comes to finishing off your assignment number 5. And on to assignment number 5, we talked about that as well, right? And I also mentioned the test, which is going to happen on August the 17th. That's the Thursday. And in your case, it's going to be from 12:30 to 2:30. It's probably going to be an hour and 45 minutes. There are not going to be any multiple choice true false. It's purely going to be practical. And I will do a review on the Tuesday, which is going to be Tuesday, August 15th, when this assignment 5 is due. Okay, we'll do a review. I'll go over everything. I'll talk about stuff I'm going to be putting on the assignment. It'll be open book, open internet. You can do everything except for talk to people, copy their code, or use your cell phone. Okay, you can't do those things. No messaging, none of that stuff on that day. All right, but I recommend, because it's going to be an assignment on your own. You might think, well, if I have access to the internet, I'm good. I'm golden, Tom. Right? I told you guys there's a limit time. Right? I'm going to ask you to do a few things, and if you have to look them up to do it, it's just no time. It's like me giving you a cheat sheet. If you're doing math and I give you a cheat sheet, the professor gives you a cheat sheet in math, it's actually worse, because that means you don't need to know, you're not going to get any value for the formulas, right? It means you have to know how to do the problem, and that's the answer. So for the final test, it's not about looking up how to do a control. It's about, how do I lay stuff out? How do I solve the problem the professor's given us in an hour and a half, right? That's the challenge, and that means you need to practice. Please practice, and please start your assignment early. Remember that on Thursday, I will be accepting your Lab 26. Questions before we go? I've kind of taken it to the end. I know this is a long video, and I apologize, but I wanted to kind of capture everything with this one, and we did have a little bit of our survey, and that took a little bit of our time. All right, guys, thank you so much. I will see you Thursday.